Hi everybody, welcome to this Monday edition of Faith-Free Family Moment. I hope and trust you had a great weekend. And as we begin a new week, I was reminded that today is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in Him. And so I pray that that's happening. And we've begun to study on our devotion time here at Faith-Free Family Moments, the book of James. Talked the last couple times about temptation, and I'd like to follow up with some more thoughts on that as James gives us some really great instruction. He says in verse 14 of chapter 1, each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. You see, the Bible is helpful in the area of temptation and sin, for it shows us how it works. And I think when you understand how something works, it kind of helps you understand maybe how to approach it better. When we learn sinning, it's never simply an event. And James is telling there's a series of steps involved that often we don't see, but he wants us to be aware of. He says, first of all, there's this step of from desire to enticement. Now, first understand, not all desires are evil in and of themselves. They're legitimate, God-given desires. But we have an enemy who's present, and he presents us with an opportunity to meet a legitimate desire in an illegitimate manner. God's given us desires, for example, food, sexual fulfillment, sleep. These are good desires. But these desires can become problematic when we seek to meet them in illegitimate ways. Desires become temptations when we allow ourselves to be carried away and enticed to fulfill that desire sinfully. And God's Word tells us, and He uses the picture to help us understand. Carried away is this idea of going after bait. It's this idea of being trapped. It's the idea of baiting a trap, maybe if you think of it that way, or baiting a hook. And that's where the word enticed is. It's a fishing term in the Greek. And enticed is to bait a hook. Now, no animal is deliberately going to step into a trap. No fish is going to deliberately bite a naked hook. What's the idea when you fish especially? It's to hide, right? It's to hide the hook. So what do? You put worms on it. I like to catfish, especially up at Brunei Island in Cornell. It's my favorite campground. Love it. And at night I like to sit there. And one thing I do is get a treble hook, and we get chicken livers, and we let them sit in the sun all day. Why? Because catfish can smell, and that stuff reeks. And so, but we put it on there to bait the hook. We don't want them to know there's a hook underneath there. And that's this idea of being carried away and enticed. The temptation doesn't really appear as a temptation in that. Temptation always carries with it some bait that appeals to our natural desires. It's the bait that's exciting. It's the bait that keeps us from seeing consequences. Fish sees a bait and thinks only of a free meal, right? But when they take the bait, they get more than they bargained for. That's for sure. Two inevitable consequences of those who yield to this alluring bait. That is, they're weakened, not strengthened. They become enslaved, not freed. Now, maybe you don't fish, but let me change the imagery a bit to something we all know a lot about. MasterCard, American Express, Visa. They throw us this baited hook. You see, they bait the hook with charge now, pay later, right? You can get whatever you want, they tell us. But there's a hook, and that is interest. And so we all face that temptation, don't we? Many don't worry too much about the consequences of out-of-control spending, because that's going to come later. And so because it comes later, they don't think through the consequences. You see, enticements, it's the bait that feeds our lusts. But then James talks about moving from deception to disobedience. So when you and I follow through on an enticement, and our desires lead us to disobey God, a conception's taken place. When our illegitimate desire is welcomed and acted upon, that act of corruption produces a child called sin. This child is definitely illegitimate. There's an example, a normal desire would be hunger. When it's enticed, it becomes and can give birth to gluttony. A sleep, normal desire. When it's enticed, it can give birth to laziness. Sex, a normal desire, but when enticed to violate God's standard, it gives birth to immorality. F.B. Meyer once wrote, "Sin is dark, dangerous, and damnable." Don't ever forget it. Some say only a little sin. It's just not too bad. It's just a little sin. But that's always a bad sin because it's an affront to God. There's a temptation in front of you, and maybe right now you're facing one. And here, it's right in your face. It looks good. Everything in you wants that. There's a hook underneath it. And you're going to get more than you bargained for. The temptation in front of you, it takes effort to conceive of a way to take the hook. And in that moment, your act will give way to sin. The fundamental fact of the Christian life is it's a matter of the will, not of the emotions. There's times in your Christian life you say no because it's the right thing to do. Simply, not because you feel like it. And so as you face today, the temptations you face, need to understand where your disobedience is headed. It's going to head to bondage. That's why you need to say no today. You just need to say no. It's the right thing to do. It's the best thing to do. And I hope you have a successful, blessed day, everybody, as you follow Jesus. God bless.